This is the 2025 Range Rover Sport Autobiography with PHEV. This thing has a base price of $118,000 and has been optioned out to $129,000-$128,000. This is a very expensive vehicle and is the second highest trim you can get in the Range Rover Sport lineup. We first did a video on a 2024 variant. That car since has received a mid-cycle refresh, and that was the base model. And if I'm going to be honest, the base model does the Range Rover Sport no favors. This autobiography has all of the luxury features you could want in a vehicle that is at this price point, and it directly competes with the Porsche Cayenne. This being the PHEV with the inline-six, the Ingenium engine competes with the Cayenne SE Hybrid. However, you can get the autobiography with their lower output version of the BMW V8, which competes with the Cayenne S. There's a trim above this called the SV, which is sort of a GTS or turbo competitor. It costs nearly $180,000 as a base price and uses essentially the X5M competition drivetrain. All right, when we're talking about this vehicle, I'm going to be the first one to acknowledge we're talking about, at least for the first owner, to be leasing this thing. These cars have very steep depreciation curves, and that is not a surprise for this class of vehicle. They all depreciate about at the same rate. The X5 and this are a couple percentage points away. In your first 3 years, you're expected to lose probably just over 40%. And in 5 years, you're looking at losing over 50% of the value of your vehicle. When you're looking at this, you're talking about leasing. And leasing, at least in our area in Illinois, you're a couple $1,000s down and between $1,500 and $2,000 a month. Land Rover, Range Rover freely admits they prioritize interior comfort for your rear and front passengers over total cargo capacity. So with that said, it is a bigger trunk than a Porsche Cayenne by about a foot or two, but in that same vein, it's about 2 cubic feet smaller than a BMW X5. However, this vehicle in total cargo capacity with the rear seats down is smaller than its two closest competitors. It's 20 cubic feet smaller than an X5. This thing is about 50 cubic feet, where an X5 is almost 70 or just above, and a Cayenne has 60 total cubic feet of cargo capacity. So if you're planning on carrying a lot of things or moving with this vehicle, it's not probably your best option. However, the interior comfort for the front and rear passengers is excellent. These are some of the most comfortable seats of any luxury SUV I've experienced, particularly the fronts. They have like 22 ways of adjustment. The massage function is much better than the BMW and Porsche options. Endless configurability. The heated and cooled functions are very, very good. The leather choice in this autobiography is also excellent. It feels like very, very expensive high-end leather. The whole cabin smells of it, and the aluminum brightwork does look nice and feels expensive. However, the switchgear in this car does not. That's something that JLR definitely struggles with. If you compare this to the quality of, say, a Porsche product, this feels much, much cheaper. All of this piano black plastic, all of the switchgear does not have the tactility of a vehicle that costs this much money. Honestly, in some ways, it feels cheaper than cars that cost like $50,000, which is a big disappointment at this price point. Your headliner is suede, it feels expensive, and the noise floor in this car, I will disagree with Mark, who brings this up in our drive segment, is very low. This is quieter than an inline-six X5 and quieter than a V8 X5, both of its competitors, and probably just on par with the Porsche Cayenne. This is a quiet car. For 2025, Land Rover has moved towards the minimalistic interior and deleted all of its physical controls, which is a bummer. Their infotainment, they call it Pivy Point, works quite well. It's reasonably fast. It's probably on par with a Mercedes. The display quality is great, but you now have to tap for basic functions that you did not have to before. If you want a massage, it's three taps in the screen. If you want to activate your heated or cool seats, it's 2 taps in the screen. Before, it was a simple press of physical control. The audio system in this car is the 800-watt Meridian audio system. You can go above this in total wattage if you change some options around for a lot more money, which is 29 speakers, but this 800-watt is a welcome change from the base audio systems I've experienced in other JLR products. I've listened to very high-end Meridian audio systems in the past, and they all sound very good. This sits somewhere in between many of its competitors. Here's an objective look at the graphs. The thing I will bring up, though, is all the piano black in the center console. It, of course, is in very high traffic areas, like your engine stop-start button and your actual gear selector. So it's going to get scratched up, it's going to get dirty, and it's going to cheapen this interior space. So let's head in the shop and put this thing up on the lift. In the shop with the 2025 Range Rover Sport Autobiography P530 or PHAV. Before we talk about the drivetrains, let's talk about what the Range Rover Sport is. This is their volume mid-size SUV. It's one of the most important things in their product portfolio, and it's on the MLA Flex architecture. It is JLR's global platform that underpins a lot of their full-size SUVs versus the outgoing Range Rover platform. It's 35% more rigid. It has a ton of electromechanical systems and modules. There's 63 modules. They are continuously improving the safety electronically of these systems to help you keep your car from getting stolen, an issue in the UK and other parts of the world. They're working on it. Apparently they've improved it for 2025 models. When it comes to the electromechanical systems, they've thrown every single thing at this possible. You have twin valve adaptive dampers with air springs as standard. You have optional rear steer, which this car has, which can turn the wheels up to 7.3 degrees. It is a very, very quick system. It makes this very large vehicle feel surprisingly nimble. You have torque vectoring by brake. You have a clutch pack based rear differential. You have enormous Brembo front brakes, and you can get a 48 volt sway bar setup for this car. They're trying to make this thing ultra nimble. You also have a 2-speed transfer case. One of the things that the Range Rover has to do, regardless if their owners do it or not, is be off-road capable. So it can ford dozens of inches of water. It has the ability to dramatically raise and lower this vehicle. You have sonar, you have every single trail camera possible. You have a lot of drive modes based around changing the electromechanical systems around being rock, dirt, mud, etc. They've done a good job trying to make this do essentially everything. And when it comes to handling and overall ride quality of this vehicle, it is definitely on the softer side. They're definitely making this feel a little bit more boaty than, say, sports sedan-like versus a Cayenne. And honestly, despite its 23-inch wheels, it does ride very well. I do think this is softer than something like a X5, particularly with similar sized wheels. When it comes to drivetrain, for the Autobiography, you get two options. Either a PHEV i6, it's their Ingenium i6. Basically, you have a 141 horsepower electric motor, a 31.8 kilowatt hour usable pack, 38 kilowatts total, paired to a turbocharged and electric supercharged inline six. It's ultra isolated, it's ultra quiet. It's good for like 30 to 40 miles of pure EV range. Really what the PHAV setup does is seamless stop start. You come to a light, the car will basically go in EV mode. It's very refined and does 0 to 60 in like the high fours. Compared to the V8 version of this, which Range Rover uses BMW as a technology partner to source all of their V8s. It is BMW's twin turbo V8 with a 48 volt setup. It's good for 0 to 60 in the low fours. Depending on the trim level you get, engine and a bunch of other options, the Range Rover Sport can tow between 7,000 and almost 8,000 pounds. So with that, let's go take this for a quick drive. You know, Mark, my deep shame is not that I'm a GM man or I secretly love Hellcats or I'm a Porsche shill. It's that I'm a JLR man at my core. You know it. Everybody does. Ingenium i6. Damn. All right, so if you're buying this thing, well, let me rephrase that. If you're leasing this thing, you are willing to take JLR and its many flaws. It's not so great residuals, it's maybe long-term question reliability, and you're buying this thing because it says Range Rover Land Rover. You want a big, posh, luxury boat with now an i6. And I think its primary competitors at this price point are the Cayenne S e-hybrid, which is a V6, not the V8 variant. Maybe you could argue an X5 plug-in hybrid, maybe the X5 V8, and
Mercedes GLE.
And the Mercedes GLE.
So we're, just to clarify, we're in a $120,000 version of this car, which you can go up when you get to the V8.
Which sounds like a lot of fun, if I'm going to be entirely honest.
I know, as good as this engine is, I mean, I was surprised when I first got in it, because I'm not a JLR apologist like you. Like, as soon as you see a Range Rover badge, Jack's like, oh my God, this is the quietest SUV, the best.
Look, the Queen of England wasn't wrong, Mark.
Yeah, it's not the best, but when you get to $120,000, I don't care what the competitive range is. There is a lot of options in the SUV class when you get to that. I mean, really, really good SUVs.
Yes.
Like the
Cayenne.
Alfa Romeo Stelvio, one of the best cars ever made, according to the owners. No, I'm busting their chops. But yeah, I mean, there's like X7s, there's GLS, you have the EV piles. Yeah. You're talking like Lucid Gravity now. You're talking about the iX and all the other ones. So I think you said it right off the bat. If you already like Range Rover, you're just buying this.
No, this is their best Range Rover Sport that they've done. It's way better than the old one is.
Yeah, it's just a de facto. If you're already in the Range Rover market, you like Land Rover, the whole thing, there's just no doubt you're going to get in this and love it. Like, you're going to make every excuse for it because it does feel like a Range Rover. It has a really solid feel to it. It does have that vault feel to it. It has all the electromechanical systems that nobody's ever going to use. The type of person who's buying this is not going to take it rock crawling
or wading through mud and
do all the shit that is in here software-wise to get you through like a puddle. You know, like this car's like driving high heels around. You know, like nobody's ever gonna do anything real with it. So, I mean, if you are, it's going to perform. It's definitely going to perform. And just tell me a little bit about your impressions of just its driving character.
If you are looking for a sports sedan two-row SUV, you're not getting this, you're getting a Cayenne. Right? That is the closest thing you're going to get in this class of vehicle to having more like sports sedan feel. This is a boat. This is a straight up land yacht. You know, dynamic mode does its best to get rid of some of its floatiness on tighter corners, but there's not tremendous body control.
Right.
It's just trying to, how can I make this as soft as possible? And then the rear steer and the fact that this is obviously a rear biased, you know, platform or rear wheel drive architecture makes this thing get in and out of corners. But as far as like basic inputs, while the steering is, you know, somewhat direct, there's zero feel in the front end. This is just a surprisingly nimble land yacht, which, to your point, I don't think rides as well as a Cayenne does. It may be initially softer than a Cayenne, I think, but overall, it's during its entire suspension stroke up and down. To your point, there's more bounciness.
It feels more truckish. There's a lot of
We're
like
also on 23s.
Yeah, and I think some of that plays into it. This is a surprisingly like harsh, like truckish ride for what it is, for it being a barge with rear steer.
I think this is softer than like an X5 though.
I don't think it's as composed. To your point, damping, again, this could be a wheel and tire combo thing, but damping wise, it definitely doesn't feel as compliant. Like, it doesn't absorb those harsher, high frequency impacts that I would expect something like this to be that's not on body on frame.
I think the last X5 we drove for a long period of time was the V8 X5, and that had huge wheels.
Yeah.
I think the initial harshness of that vehicle was higher than this. May not be as soft as your X7 was.
No, the X7, honestly, even with Air Ride, I don't think was as composed as this. I feel like the X7 did a better job of high frequency impacts, but the larger, like, higher amplitude impacts were worse on the X7, namely on big wheels and tires. This just always feels, there's a lot of like jitteriness to it, like that. It's always there in all pavement types, and I wish that it would isolate it out more for it being such a boat.
What about the quietness factor? You and I currently live on the opposite extremes of quietness.
Yeah.
I drive around in a Camaro SS1 LE now and a CX-50.
Right.
Neither of those vehicles are that quiet. You drive around on a Lucid Air, which is incredibly quiet.
Yeah, it's pretty quiet for what it is.
So where does this fall in the threshold of big SUVs?
I think it's in the top 5%. I don't think it's Mercedes like GLS quiet or like pure like 7 Series. Like, we're talking like big luxury SUV cars.
Do you think it's at least as quiet as an X5 or something?
Yeah, I would say it's on par with like an X5 for sure. Maybe a little bit quieter than an X5. I'm just looking at the price point. You got to remember, right? I'm looking at $120,000+ for this. I'm expecting like S-Class levels.
$1,500 a month, I think, was the lease deal I saw.
I'm sorry.
You should not be buying this thing.
Yeah, whatever you're leasing it for, you know, again, you're probably somebody that's going to get into this and likely have no basis of comparison for, you know, 20 other luxury vehicles. You want this just because of what it is, and I get it. So I'm being very critical of it.
Naturally, as you should be.
Yeah.
This is an incredibly important class. I think its standouts are the way it looks,
Yes.
the way it feels from an interior side, I do think, well, to your points, the electronics, I don't think are as good as iDrive, but I think there's in some ways a bigger wow factor. The leather, the seats, the general status to this, even versus like a Cayenne.
Remove the tech for a
Yes.
minute and just talk about the interior. You know, we did talk about the interior. I do think it, despite its piano black and high gloss surfaces, this feels incredibly well built on the inside. It feels every bit of its price point. You know, it doesn't have like generic leather that you can confuse with a 20.
It feels like real leather.
Yes, it does.
The Ingenium i6 to the PHEV setup has a lot of power.
It's incredibly isolated.
Yes.
Like, it is really, really isolated and very powerful for what it was. In fact, I drove it at first and not really driving it hard. I'm like, I thought it was a V8. That's how smooth it is. So they did a really good job here.
Yep. I think they've done an excellent job with the gearbox combination as well. It's a Range Rover. The all-wheel drive system works well. Its cons are it doesn't have the nimbleness and the general driving ability of a Cayenne.
Right.
It is a lot more money than its equivalent BMW.
Yes.
And
It sacrifices a lot of, like, and we talked about this kind of before the camera started rolling. It does trade off on-road for that off-road capability, and I think for most people, when you get in a Cayenne, a spec'd out Cayenne, you're like, yes, I'm not going back, and that's the hard part when you compare this. Now, the hybridization feature, you know, clearly you're buying PHEV here and you're probably never charging it, but if you do, you're going to get about 35 miles range. Maybe, depending on how you drive it.
how cold it is.
Yeah, exactly. So it is nice that it does it, and it is super refined in its EV-only mode, and you can toggle in the settings what you want. If you want to keep the EV part for like your town drives, if you don't want to blow through it, you can run hybrid. That system is pretty seamless. I had zero issues switching back and forth. No juddering, no like
The stop-start,
jarring.
because the PHEV side works well too.
Yes.
I mean, drive everything in this class.
Yeah, I would.
Drive everything in this class. You know, this is not the best handling and driving. You're buying this because the prestige factor and its overall interior and exterior, and you're going to trade off in some other factors. All right, so with that, Mark, let's wrap up this video. Final thoughts on the 2025 Range Rover Sport Autobiography. Well, if you are looking at this compared to the older Range Rover Sports of the prior generation, and you're looking to get into a new Range Rover and you love this brand and you don't care, you just want to know if it's better, it's a lot better. This is truly a very impressive luxury good. The interior space is nice, a lot of the technology is pretty decent, the drivetrain's ultra refined, it rides pretty well. However, if you are not sort of a Range Rover fanboy and you're looking to get into one of these things and you want to compare it to its nearest rivals, this is how it stacks up against, say, the Porsche Cayenne Sport or S or Cayenne SE Hybrid and the BMW X5 with V8 or PHEV i6. So when compared to the BMW, it is a more special feeling cabin, it rides better, but it costs a lot more money, anywhere between, let's say, $10,000 to $30,000 more. And from an overall usability perspective, it is not as big. It has a much higher load floor in the back. The trunk space is smaller. Overall cargo capacity is lower. I will argue the interior technology, specifically the infotainment, is not as good as BMW's latest iDrive. However, when it comes to drivetrain refinement, honestly, they're using the same V8. If you decide to get this with a V8 instead of the PHEV, and this Ingenium i6 is every bit as isolated, may not be as smooth in the power band, but as isolated and as powerful as the B58 with their plug-in hybrid variant. Now, when compared to the Cayenne S and SE hybrid, it's a harder comparison. If you want your big SUV to drive like a sports sedan and have tremendous inputs, the Range Rover is not for you. The Cayenne has way better steering, it's far more communicative. The chassis has better body control. It gets in and out of corners more like a sports sedan does. I think in the chassis department, the Porsche does a better job. The drivetrains, though, in the Range Rover, honestly, are more refined. I think the N63 is better than the Audi-sourced V8, at least when you compare that to the low-output Cayenne S. And I think the Ingenium i6 is a lot smoother and better isolated. And in many ways, the PHEV integration is better than you get in a Cayenne SE hybrid. The interior space, I think the Cayenne is better screwed together. It has higher feeling or better feeling switchgear, but the Range Rover has a more special feeling cabin. The leather is much nicer. It looks like a more expensive place to be. and it has similar customization, plus it is cheaper. A equivalently spec'd Cayenne S or Cayenne SE hybrid with the same luxury goods like massaging seats, a high-end audio system, extended leather, big wheels, does cost a lot more money than this Range Rover Sport does, anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000 on top of this thing. So that becomes your debate. There's not a perfect answer for you, but honestly, if you are in the market and you're looking to buy a high-end luxury SUV and you're okay with the depreciation factor, the Range Rover Sport should be on the top of your list. So with that, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon.